Most fathers don't lose custody in a dramatic courtroom battle. There's no shouting, no final ruling that declares them unfit, no single moment they can point to and say, "That's when it all changed." Instead, it happens quietly, through a few signatures, a missed deadline, a moment of silence when they should have spoken up. And before they know it, they've gone from being a full-time parent to someone who gets weekends, if they're lucky. The most dangerous part? They didn't see it coming. They were trying to be reasonable, cooperative, peaceful. They thought keeping things civil would earn them respect in court. But family court doesn't reward quiet. It rewards consistency, documentation, and bold clarity. And when you don't speak up early, the system decides who you are for you. This video isn't about fear, it's about awareness. Because custody rights aren't always taken. Sometimes, they're handed over without a fight. And the fathers who lose them, they weren't careless. They were just uninformed, until it was too late. It always starts with the same logic. Let's just keep things calm for now. Maybe you're asked to agree to a temporary custody schedule while things get sorted out. It sounds harmless. Maybe she stays in the house with the kids, and you agree to see them on weekends or a few nights a week. You tell yourself it's just for a little while. A placeholder. Something to get through the storm until a more permanent plan is worked out. But here's the part no one tells you. In family court, temporary becomes permanent more often than not. Judges don't want to shake up routines that seem to be working. If the kids have been living with their mom during the divorce process, and the schedule has been relatively smooth, the court sees that as stability. And stability always wins over fairness. So even if the original arrangement was just something you agreed to under pressure, or without legal advice, it quickly becomes the baseline for your future. The longer you follow that temporary plan, the harder it becomes to argue for anything different. You didn't intend to give up your parenting role. You were just trying to be flexible, reasonable, mature. But family court doesn't care about intent. It cares about patterns. And once that pattern is set, changing it feels like trying to swim upstream in cement. What you thought was buying time was actually selling control. And by the time you realize it, your presence in your child's life has been reduced to a schedule you never really agreed to keep. Joint custody sounds like a win. You hear the words and feel a sense of relief. Finally, something fair. Both parents involved, both with rights, both sharing responsibility. But what most fathers don't realize is that joint doesn't always mean equal. Buried in that same agreement is often a small but powerful phrase, primary residential parent. And 9 times out of 10, it's not you. That one title changes everything. It means your ex gets to decide where your child goes to school, which doctor they see, what activities they join, and when, if at all, you get a say in those decisions. You may have legal custody on paper, but in practice, you're left out of the loop. Birthdays, school events, medical appointments. You don't hear about them unless she tells you. And if she doesn't, the court won't chase her down. You're technically involved, but legally sidelined. This setup happens because many men agree to joint custody without demanding clear time-sharing terms or shared decision-making authority. They assume joint means they'll have influence, that their role is protected. But unless the agreement spells out exact days, times, and parental authority in writing, it means nothing. And when you finally try to assert yourself, when you question her choices or ask to adjust the schedule, you're seen as disruptive, not responsible. You didn't give up your rights on purpose. But by accepting vague terms or not challenging the imbalance from the start, you let the court define your role for you. And that role? It's often less father and more visitor. Sometimes it's not what you say that costs you custody. It's what you miss. One skipped hearing, one missed mediation session, one deadline you didn't realize mattered. And just like that, the court moves on without you. A lot of fathers assume the early steps in the process are just formalities. They think they'll have time to fight for custody later when it really counts. But in family court, every moment counts, and silence is treated like consent. Maybe you were dealing with stress, work, or didn't get proper notice. Maybe your lawyer didn't explain how serious it was. It doesn't matter. If you don't show up, the judge assumes you don't care, or worse, that you agree with whatever the other side is proposing. And if she's asking for primary custody or a specific parenting plan, the court might approve it by default. Even a short absence can set the tone for the entire case. You might walk in later, expecting to negotiate, only to learn that decisions have already been made. At that point, you're not arguing for what's fair. You're asking the court to reverse something it already put in place. And that's a much steeper climb. The truth is, family court isn't forgiving. It won't pause the process because you were overwhelmed. It won't circle back to make sure you're okay with the outcome. It moves forward fast, and if you're not in the room, your rights are left behind with you. On the surface, leaving language flexible in your custody agreement feels like a sign of trust. You don't want to be difficult. You want to show you're cooperative. So when the paperwork uses phrases like reasonable visitation or liberal parenting time, it almost sounds ideal, like both sides will just figure it out as they go. But here's the problem. The court can't enforce what it can't define. And if things go wrong later, vague wording won't protect you. At first, it might work fine. Maybe you and your ex are getting along, and schedules are loose but functional. But then life happens. She starts changing plans, cancels a weekend, doesn't respond to your messages. Suddenly, that reasonable parenting time turns into barely seeing your child at all. And when you try to push back, you realize the agreement has no teeth. There's no specific schedule to enforce, no guaranteed holidays, no backup plan if she decides to change the rules. Judges don't get involved in vague arrangements unless there's a clear violation of terms. And if your terms were never clear to begin with, the court sees it as a private disagreement, not a legal issue. So you're stuck, waiting, arguing, hoping she'll come around. And meanwhile, the bond with your child thins out, week by week, under the weight of uncertainty. What you thought was flexibility becomes a trap. And the worst part is, you agreed to it. Not because you didn't care, but because you didn't know how quickly cooperation can turn into control when nothing is written down. A lot of fathers walk into family court thinking if they just stay calm, cooperative, and respectful, things will work out. They're told not to make waves, not to be aggressive, not to fight because it might look bad. So they stay quiet. They let little things slide. They don't push back when decisions feel one-sided. All in the hope that the court will notice their patience and reward their maturity. But that's not how the system works. In family court, silence isn't seen as grace. It's seen as surrender. When you don't speak up, when you don't demand clear parenting time, shared decision-making, or enforceable rights, the court doesn't assume you're being noble. It assumes you're fine with whatever's on the table. Judges are overloaded. They don't have time to read between the lines or guess your intentions. If you're not clearly fighting for your role as a parent, they assume you're comfortable taking a back seat. That's why so many fathers end up with less time, less influence, and fewer rights than they ever expected, because they were trying to avoid conflict. They thought being easy to work with would earn them more say, more respect, more balance. Instead, they walked out of court with a watered-down version of fatherhood they never agreed to, and no clear path to fix it. You don't have to be combative to be clear. You don't have to be loud to stand your ground. But if you think staying quiet will protect your image, understand this. The court doesn't reward silence. It records it. And later, when you're trying to get back what you lost, you'll realize you gave it away piece by piece by saying nothing when it mattered most. Most fathers don't realize they've lost custody until they try to use rights they no longer have. They go to pick up their child and are told the schedule changed. They try to weigh in on a school decision and find out it's already been made. They call their lawyer, frustrated, only to hear the words they never expected. You agreed to this. And that's when the truth hits. Custody wasn't taken from them in one dramatic moment. It was handed over slowly, through overlooked clauses, missed meetings, vague language, and a silence they thought was strength. The system doesn't punish you for caring. It punishes you for hesitating, for being too trusting, too quiet, too willing to believe that fairness would just happen on its own. And by the time you realize what you've lost, the routine is set, the judge has moved on, and your child is growing up in a life you barely get to touch. But it doesn't have to be this way, because now you know what to look for. Now you understand how easily your rights can slip away, not with a fight, but with a nod. So if you're in the early stages, speak up, be clear, get it in writing. Protect your role like your relationship depends on it, because it does. The most important thing you can fight for isn't your stuff. It's your presence. And no one will guard that but you.